the people all in line. What's making them look at me? Can't imagine that their minds are thinking the same as me. I can hear the grass grow. I can hear the grass grow. I see rainbows in the evening.
Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video, and today I have a very special guest who you can see on the screen. May I introduce Steve Whitty?
Hi there.
We thought we'd get together today and do a special video which is going to be all about some rather well-known musicians from the West Midlands.
We're going to be discussing the move at Idle Race and leading up to the early formation of ELO. We're also going to mention Wizzard as well. So part of it's going to be a bit of a Roy Wood loving, so to speak. And that's where I come into it. Growing up in the early 70s, Wizzard on top of the pops, and then you find out after, ELO became really big in the 70s. Then as you sort of get into music, you realise that ELO came together because of Roy Wood and Jeff Lynne and Bev Bevan coming out the move. So you go back and you discover the move and you discover how great a band they were. I mean, in my view, Roy Wood is one of these people that is criminally underlooked when it comes into great songwriters and producers of our time.
For one reason or another, he hasn't really survived as a kind of major record seller or kind of rock star. He's kind of become a bit of a cult name, which is quite strange really, given how massively successful he was in the pop charts in the UK in the 1960s. You can explain this better than me. Where does Roy Wood actually come from? Just in terms of, Birmingham or the West Midlands or the Black Country, do you know? I mean,
He's from Birmingham. It's the Kitts Green district, which I think is South Birmingham. There was a big scene going on in Birmingham in the 60s, quite a lot round the Cedar Club in Birmingham, which is just off, it was in the centre of Birmingham, where bands would play, rehearse. So you got bands like the Mayfair Set, the Night Riders, Carl Wayne and the Vikings, amongst others. And they'd all meet, and the move came about as Ace Kefford, Trevor Burton and Roy Wood wanted to form a band that featured the best musicians in Birmingham and to move on alongside the likes of The Who. They were sort of influenced by that. And they got the band together in December 1965. And they played their first gig at the Belfry, Sutton Coldfield, which is where I live. It's about 5 miles away from where I am. It's the Belfry has the golf course where they hold the Ryder Cup.
I mean, if we can just put some names to faces for a minute. So this is Roy here in his
That's Roy Wood. Roy Wood.
D'Artagnan phase.
Yeah.
This is Bev Bevan, the drummer.
Yeah.
Then
real name Beverly Bevan. That's Ace Kefford, Chris Ace Kefford, yeah. He was the original leader of the band. He was considered to be like a mod face. He'd been in Carl Wayne and the Vikings around that point. They all sort of been through various bands.
So that's
Carl Wayne, yeah.
Now, I think I know this one. Trevor Burton, I think he was in Danny King and the Mayfair Set. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All this stuff used to be at my fingertips, but it's kind of dimmed over the years.
Yeah.
Bev Bevan was also in Carl Wayne and the Vikings as well.
Yeah. Roy Wood was in the Night Riders. But how Carl Wayne and Bev Bevan was asked to join the band through just jamming at the Cedar Club. Carl Wayne and Bev Bevan sort of sat in and then said, "Do you want to be in the band?" So that lineup of the band played their first gig in January 1966 at the Bell Hotel in Stourbridge, which is around Robert Plant's neck of the woods.
There is a story that has emerged in recent years. I don't know if you've heard this story or not. I think it's Bev Bevan now maintains that David Bowie was instrumental in the formation of the move. Have you heard this story?
I have seen this story. Yes, David Bowie was playing with his band at the Cedar Club and sort of like encouraged the formation of the move. Now, how true is that? I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise.
I'm just going to show a record for a minute because this was the first move record I ever actually bought, and it's one of these things. It's from the Reader's Digest, and it's the move on one side, and on the back it's the tremolos. And I would have picked this up probably in about 1984, 85, something like that. Didn't really know who the move were, but I had heard their music already when I was very young on the Ed Stewart Pop Party album, which British record buyers will know it was a fairly famous children's record, and it had a game of musical statues on it. And the record that they play during the game is Night of Fear by The Move. And that must have been one of the very first pop records I ever heard. I mean, I would have been 6 or 7. I had no idea what it was at the time, but I did enjoy it. I found it an interesting sound, with the classical kind of influences. And what I find really interesting is that I got into music in 1978. And ELO were huge at the time. They were one of the big acts that were just in the charts, weren't they? They were just in the charts, big style. But I would have had no idea at the time that there was any connection at all between that and this. I went shopping with a friend and her dad happened to be standing with me in the racks, and I pulled this record out, and he said to me, "Oh, James, you must buy that record, it's fantastic." And he said, "There's a great song on there called Blackberry Way, and you just have to have it in your collection, So I bought it and took it home and played it, and I was like, right, excellent, yeah, clearly a great just a great pop record. But what immediately drew me in to The Move and to this whole thing was just these liner notes.
Yeah.
I started reading the liner notes, and I can distinctly remember it was the first time in my life that I ever kind of properly started to understand about bands having this kind of prehistory. It's like doing some detective work now, and then starting to read about Danny King and the Mayfair Set, Carl Wayne and the Vikings, Mike Sheridan and the Night Riders. It's just that thing of like this incredible web of stuff, all just this backstory, and it really sucked me into this kind of Birmingham, West Midlands. I don't know what it was. There was something about it that I just found incredibly interesting.
I think people forget that Birmingham did have its own scene. Well, most towns had its own scene, but it all got sort of lost with Liverpool and London, and in a sense Manchester as well. I think the first chart act of notes from I would say the West Midlands were the Applejacks. Tell me when, but they were from Solihull, I've been told, so they were a bit posh.
Yeah, you had the Spencer Davis group, of course.
Yeah, Moody Blues had their number one hit in '65 with Go Now. What Moody Blues and The Move had in common was they shared the same manager.
Tony Secunda.
Yeah, he was managing the Moody Blues, and then he saw The Move and it's offered to be their manager. Yeah,
because Bev Bevan tells a story about how he had he'd been in a band with Denny Lane called the Diplomats.
Yeah,
Denny Lane had left that band in order to go and form the Moody Blues, and quite soon afterwards, the Moody Blues got their first hit, Go Now, and Bev had to go and get a job in this awful kind of clothing store in Birmingham. And he was working alongside Jasper Carrot, who was his best friend.
Yeah, he's his best mate.
Yeah, and he said he watched the TV that Christmas, and he said there was Denny on top of the pops with all the dancers around him, and he said, and I was working in this awful kind of clothes store, and it was like just the end of the world. It was like, oh my God, what on earth has happened? And at that stage, I think he and a few of the other guys from all these various bands just got together and said, we have got to do something. We've got to get together, go down to London and just do this. Yeah. And that's really how The Move came to be.
And that's where Secunda came in, because he got them a residency at the Marquee. And he started the whole hype machine. When they first appeared at the Marquee, they were dressed in gangsters' uniform. He got them involved in various stunts. I think one stunt was Carl Wayne used to smash up a television on stage with an axe. There's pictures floating around of him actually doing that. Even when they got their production deal, they signed the contract on the back of a topless model.
I've forgotten about that.
I think her name was Liz Wilson.
Right.
Tony Secunda was the king of the sort of like publicity stunt, and the band went along with it. But as the story goes on, it backfired on them big time.
Yeah. I'll leave you to tell the famous story, which I think we both know what that is. But there's another story where there's something that it was like they had a fake nuclear bomb or something, and they were parading down the street. Strange, isn't it? It's just another era, really, where these things would just be front page news. This crazy band from Birmingham just go down to London and just absolutely just start to dominate the headlines because they've got this manager who just will stop at nothing to get them recognition. I guess we should pause for a minute and just consider, in this kind of story, you've got this really singular talent, which is Roy Wood, who turned out to be a bit of a kind of almost like a Ray Davies figure.
I would also add Brian Jones into that, because Roy Wood had this talent of being able to pick up an instrument and master it. He's one of the best bagpipe players I've ever seen.
Yeah, bassoons, saxophones,
And probably one of Secunda's better decisions was he recognised that Roy Wood could be the songwriter. Roy Wood hadn't really written any songs before the move. He'd only written a couple.
Yeah.
But with Secunda's encouragement, Roy Wood started writing the songs. I think Night of Fear, the first single, was probably the third or fourth song he'd ever written.
There's a famous story, isn't there, where they needed a song for the next morning, and because they were going into the studio, and Roy hadn't written anything, and Secunda basically gave him a bottle of whiskey, locked him in the hotel room, and said, "You've got to have written a song by tomorrow morning." And all the other band went off to, get some drinks down them and, have some meals or whatever. And they came back the next morning, and Roy had written Fire Brigade.
Yeah.
Just in his hotel room. It's an incredible story. I mean, if you imagine that pressure of just going, right, I've got to write a song now in one evening, and you're sat in a hotel room with a bottle of whiskey and your guitar, and you come up with Fire Brigade, one of the catchiest, most memorable, great British pop singles ever.
I think it just takes some sort of genius to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got that single here somewhere. Where is it? Here it is, Fire Brigade on Regal's on a phone. It's not a picture sleeve, unfortunately, but
I know. First single was Night of Fear, and Roy Wood actually wanted the B-side Disturbance as the single. Yeah. But they went with Night of Fear. Heavily using the bass line was using the 1812 Overture. Yeah. If you hear it, you'll know what I'm on about. Then the second single, which is probably my favourite, was I Can Hear the Grass Grow. Yeah. And if you go on YouTube, you will see the band performing on Beat Club or wherever. Yeah. And Roy Wood has no facial hair, which is a very rare sight. And this is a song actually about mental illness. Everyone thinks it's a drug song. But the title of the song comes from a letter a photographer who knew Roy Wood had received. But no, this guy was complaining, the town is so quiet, I have to listen to music on the radio, otherwise I can hear the grass grow. And then you go on to the third single, which you've shown Flowers in the Rain. Yeah. Famous for being the first single, first record played on Radio 1 when it was launched in 1967. Yeah, introduced by Tony Blackburn. Tony Blackburn, yeah. Yeah. Here's my copy, the Regals on a Phone. But this is when Secunda's promotion really backfired. With the single on the promo was a postcard included featuring a naked Harold Wilson, who was Prime Minister at the time, holding hands with his secretary, Marcia Faulkner. I thought he was in the bath with her. Something like that, yeah. Wilson sued and won. He didn't want the money, but the High Court said, all royalties from this record go to charity. Roy Wood and The Move, I've never seen a penny from this song. Was that a number one record? No, it wasn't number one. Number two, right, okay. Number two. And that's cost the group millions, particularly Roy Wood. Roy Wood was really upset about this. Yeah, but he was. And pretty soon afterwards, Secunda was fired as manager and they got Don Arden in. Yeah. However, there is one guy is featured on here that we mentioned in BC videos. There's instrumental arrangement by Tony Visconti. He was the assistant producer on this record. I think it was one of the first records he worked on when he moved to London in whatever it was, 66, 67, because he was friends with Denny Cordell, wasn't he? Yeah. I think Denny Cordell was instrumental in bringing Tony Visconti over to England, or there was an invitation to come to England and work as an arranger or do something. And that was one of the first things he did. But The Move, like quite a few bands over the years, they had certain problems, didn't they? As in interpersonal problems. There were things going on within that band that meant they were never going to last, really. Various stories, isn't there, about Bevan and Burton, yeah, they were on stage in Italy somewhere and they had a fight on stage. Yeah. Do you know anything about that? Yeah, basically, Trevor Burton was getting a bit disillusioned, particularly at the time of Blackberry Way. It wasn't direct, it's very pop oriented sound. It wasn't the sound he was into. Which did get to number one. That was their big number one single. Yeah. Blackberry Way. Yeah. This is my comp as well. It's a double record one off the record, so it's a double album. So it's a various mixtures of comps that are floating, even CD comps. I mean, the band did suffer from bad luck because in '67 they'd recorded their first album, but the master tape got stolen from a car, and they found the tape, but it found it in some sort of like rubbish tip or whatever. But the tape was so badly damaged they couldn't use it, so they had to re-record it. So the first album didn't come out. It should have come out in '67. Didn't
Right.
come out until 68.
Ace Kefford, actually, he was the first casualty from the group, wasn't he? He was the first guy to leave. This is
Yes.
Ace
And
Kefford.
this,
Apparently, he started to act strangely, and he used to sit in the back of the bus, not talking to anybody, and just kind of gradually entered that kind of Twilight Syd Barrett kind of space.
yeah.
And I think he ended up hurling his guitar at the wall, and he went home and slashed his wrists, I think.
Yeah, yes. He was just after Fire Brigade, this was. He'd suffered badly from the drugs he was taking. It changed the whole nature of the band, because the one thing you haven't mentioned about the band was that, apart from Bev Bevan, all four could sing, all four members. And in fact, the first couple of singles featured all four. I think the first single, Night of Fear, actually featured all four of them as taking lead vocalists. During the live shows, each member of the band had at least one song where they were lead vocalist.
Yeah.
And that, when Kefford left, or I think he more likely was kicked out, that sort of broke the whole unity of the band, because then a lot more was put on Trevor Burton, and meant Trevor Burton was having to play the bass, which he shared with Carl Wayne. Carl Wayne could play the bass, so Carl Wayne would play bass on some certain numbers if Trevor Burton was doing Ace Kefford's vocal parts.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they all did do this kind of amazing 4-part harmony stuff, 4 lead vocalists, essentially. You know, the Who didn't have that. You know, the Kinks didn't have that. It was definitely something which they had, which made them stand apart, wasn't it?
I mean, I think Kefford just got kicked out just before the release of the first album. And you were saying, James, these albums are notoriously difficult to find. This is the only album that charted for him. He'd really gone by that time.
Yeah. This record was a bit of a kind of hodgepodge, really. It had so many little kind of gems on it, but it maybe doesn't quite hold together as an album, perhaps, as it could have done. It's them trying to set out their stall, but it's not necessarily cohesive. I mean, you've got some great stuff. You've got Yellow Rainbow by Roy Wood, Kilroy Was Here, which is a fantastic pop song. Yeah. Walk Upon the Water, which, again, that was a song that contained all their vocals, I think. They had a bit of a take-it-and-turny thing. Yeah. Also, at the end of this record, you've got the first version of Cherry Blossom Clinic, which is going to be revisited on the second album. It's definitely a bit of a mishmash, but there are, I think this album is prized by kind of psych fans, you know, British psych fans.
Yeah.
Do kind of, you know, rate this record really as being, you know, reasonably significant release from that period.
Originals will cost you 3 figures. They're highly priced. They're very rare. That's the thing. I think all Move original albums are very rare because they weren't an albums band. Well, they didn't sell as an album band as much as they would like to be seen as an album band.
Well, it's quite strange to think, isn't it, that they brought out the first album, which was it 68?
Yeah.
And almost as soon as that album came out, the band started to break up. So that when you get to the second album, if we flip this over, we now have Shazam, Roy and Bev from the previous lineup.
Yeah.
Carl Wayne is still there, actually, to be fair.
Just about, because he left around the time back it came out. Trevor Burton apparently plays bass on some of the tracks, but it's not credited.
So Trevor's gone, Ace is gone, and we've got Rick Price now.
Rick Price, and he's not a full-time member. He's just like on a non-contract,
on salary.
Basically on salary, yeah. Then Blackberry Way came out. That was their only #1 hit in February 1969. That was produced by Jimmy Miller. Yeah. And we're sort of like going on to like ELO, but on keyboard, harpsichord, it was Richard Tandy who would feature on with ELO. It's a song that's inspired by Penny Lane. It's a total reverse Blackberry Way to the pop psych. It's quite a dreary sounding number, sort of like harking back to those growing up in Birmingham, which, you know, was as far removed from San Francisco as you could get. You know, it inspired Black Sabbath, those old slums, bomb sites that were. Yeah,
I think Blackberry Way is an extraordinary song. I've always loved it. There's something about it. There's a sort of atmosphere of menace in it almost. It's got a kind of dirgy, like you say, dirgy kind of quality to it, but it's also got a sing-along quality to it. Yeah. Which is a very interesting, it's like a really interesting tension, this kind of dirgy, slightly menacing feel that goes into this very sing-along thing, but it's not really. I've seen that song done live a couple of times, and it never works live, because live it always just turns into a kind of like, oh, this is a oldie, 60s oldie, whereas the studio version is sinister.
Yeah.
In some way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a song about Birmingham. Birmingham was a great time. It wasn't swinging London. Only swinging London have all the colour about it. Everywhere else, well, that sort of passed by.
It's a fantastic inversion of that kind of Beach Boys, Californian Skies thing. I mean, the thing is, Roy was a massive fan of Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, and I just love the fact that he did Blackberry Way, and he sang, you know, Blackberry Way, absolutely pouring down with rain. It's a terrible day. Because it's so British or so English, isn't it? I mean, you talk about Pete Townsend, you talk about Ray Davis. So really, we're talking a similar, well, I think we're talking a similar level of genius.
Yeah. As I said at the start, you know, Roy Wood is one of the great geniuses of British music. Yeah.
So, I mean, on Shazam, Shazam is a very, very different record to the first Move album. It's got far fewer tracks for a start. So you're starting to get kind of late 60s. Progressive music is now coming in. Bands who are doing these kind of longer songs. So side one, you've got 3 tracks. Side 2, you've got 3 tracks. Hello Susie, which is this very kind of...
I'll tell you what, you compare that because Amen Corner had the hit with it.
Right, that's right, yeah.
And you hear, and their version, it's hello, and it's a very upbeat here on the Move, when you hear Roy Wood sing it, it's almost like menace. It's almost like, hello, Susie. And it's like Susie's got to go, and run away. Best run away.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been quite sure. When did Sabbath come on the scene? Because I hear a lot of Black Sabbath.
Late 68, early 69, when they were starting to get...
Yeah, I mean, there are some of the guitar sounds and some of the drums on Shazam which start to get a bit of a Sabbathy feel, and that applies to the next Move album as well. But... anyway, then you've got a fantastic song called Beautiful Daughter. Beautiful song. I've always loved that.
Yeah.
It's got a kind of McCartney Revolver era almost quality. It's that good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just a sublime melody, wonderful arrangement. It's just a fantastic song. And then you've got Cherry Blossom Clinic, which is a remake of the song that had been on the first album. But this is where you start to hear the first intimations, really, I think, of ELO coming in. Because he splices it with bits of Bach and there's kind of orchestral interludes in it.
Well, interestingly enough, this album is a co-production of Roy Wood, Carl Wayne and Rick Price with a guy called Gerald Chevin. So Roy Wood was starting to cut his production chops. I don't know where the Carl Wayne part of it comes into it.
Gerald Chevin was from Advision Studios and he had a partnership with Eddie Offord, who was the guy that went on to produce Yes, of course. And Chevin and Offord produced the first Idle Race album, which we'll get onto in a minute. It's just tangled web, isn't it?
It's coming together now.
Yeah, so you've got these 3 great Roy songs on side 1, and then on side 2, my understanding of the history is that for some reason, I could be mistaken about this, but I've always thought that maybe Carl Wayne was a bit like the Mike Love of the Move. So, like in Pet Sound, you had Mike Love sort of didn't really like Pet Sound and he kind of wanted things done differently. I think in the Shazam era Move, Carl Wayne didn't really like the direction that Roy was going in and he wanted to sing a different kind of song. So on side 2, you've got Fields of People, Don't Make My Baby Blue, and The Last Thing on My Mind, all 3 of which were by outside writers. You've got side 1, great songs by Roy Wood, side 2, a load of covers, and it's like, that's a bit of a shame.
It's interesting to note that Rick Price wasn't the first choice to replace Trevor Burton because they had asked Jeff Lynne at the time.
Jeff Lynne, don't bring Jeff Lynne.
Too many Jeffs in this world. Jeff Lynne was asked to join, but he turned it down because he really wanted to concentrate on the Idle Race. The next person was asked was Hank Marvin. The Shadows had just broken up. The band had tried to make out it was just a bit of a publicity stunt, but in 1973, Hank Marvin confirmed he had been asked in an interview with the Melody Maker, and he turned it down because their schedule was a bit too hectic.
Interesting.
Interesting choice. But if you think that 69, 70, Hank Marvin was making those albums with Bruce Welch and John Farrar, which were very much like country rock, Crosby, Stills and Nash. So it doesn't seem actually that wide of the mark choice, to be honest. So, and Rick Price then was asked to join on bass.
Yeah, I mean, talking of that kind of, country rock thing, a song that I've always loved on this record is their version of The Last Thing on My Mind, which was a Tom Paxton song originally, a folk song, which was nothing like the Moves version. Now, I first heard that, as in the Moves version, on this compilation. I had a cassette of this. This is the Move collection. And back in the 90s, this would have been, I absolutely became obsessed with this, with the Moves version of The Last Thing on My Mind. It's about 6 or 7 minutes long. It's got all these incredible guitar solos. Now, I'm guessing, was it Trevor Burton before he left the band, or was it maybe Roy Wood playing the guitar? I don't know, but
it probably might be more Roy Wood than anything, because Trevor Burton was just the rhythm guitarist in the movie.
Yeah, I think it was Roy. I think I think Roy Wood was a much better guitarist than he was ever really given credit for. I think he did some great stuff with them. The Last Thing on My Mind by The Move, it's just fantastic. Yeah. It's so it winds and changes and just it's just a great 60s. It's not psych exactly, but it's definitely progressive, isn't it?
Yeah. We said at the start that The Move didn't make a dent in the US. Roy Wood wasn't very popular. The Move only ever made one, abortive tour of the US. That was in October '69.
Right.
And they were supporting the Stooges. And they played a show in. They ended up playing a couple of shows. The promoters just pulled the rug and says, "No, we're not having you on." Yeah. And the band had to pay for their own gigs and had to pay for their way back. It was just a bit of a disaster for them.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because years later, Bev Bevan always said, I mean, this was during the height of the, I think it was in the 80s. So ELO had already peaked, but he was kind of saying that even though I've got this huge profile now in the States as a member of ELO, he said people, music people are much more interested when they meet me and talk to me. It's the move that they want to know about. And he said it kind of always astonished him because he always thought that the move just literally meant nothing in America whatsoever because of the abortive tour, the fact that they sold no records, no singles. But then you've got people like Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons in New York in the early 70s who loved the move. And they loved High and all these British bands, So it's interesting that they did have a big impact, and Roy Wood had a huge impact, but it was a cult thing, wasn't it? It was always a cult.
Yeah. Well, Wizzard supported Kiss on one of their early tours when Wizzard went over and went down literally like a lead balloon with,
like a lead
with the audience. But which Paul Stanley said broke his heart because he loved Roy Wood.
I mean, you've mentioned Jeff Lynne now already as we get into the chronology of this, so we might as well just kind of say now. So after the Shazam album, the move then go through another little thing, and we end up with this new lineup.
Yeah.
And now we've got Jeff Lynne coming in.
Yeah, I can give you the reasons why this happened. Okay. Don Alban sold out his management of the move to a guy called Peter Walsh, and he was managing bands like Marmalade and other pop bands that were moving towards cabaret, which obviously didn't sit well with Roy Wood, but that was sort of the direction Carl Wayne wanted to go in. In fact, Roy Wood was already talking about setting up Electric Light Orchestra at this time. And Wayne knew this. And Carl Wayne, one of the suggestions he says, well, let's get Ace and Trevor back into the band. You could be like your Brian Wilson. You can write songs for the move and while working on your little project. Yeah. But the other, Wood, Bevan and Price said, well, no way. And that really led to Carl Wayne leaving the band.
Carl Wayne went off to a career in showbiz. I mean, he was in Blood Brothers, wasn't he, for about 20 years. So you could kind of see where he was heading. He was kind of heading in a more kind of showbiz, stagey kind of direction.
Which was the direction for a lot of the bands in the 60s. They ended up doing cabaret to keep themselves going. It's not like now where you can have a presence on the internet and you could just do festivals to keep the name going. You had to earn because most of these bands never earned a penny.
Well, I mean, that's sort of what happened to the Moody Blues, wasn't it? I mean, they kind of ended up on the chicken in the basket circuit and almost broke up. And it was only because they just somehow managed to make Nights in White Satin that they were just kind of rescued from that, sprung from that line.
The story of that is that they were played a cabaret one night and this guy comes in and told them they're the worst band they'd ever seen. And, I paid good money to have a night out with my wife, and you were absolutely the pits. And they literally, from that night, threw away the blue suits and said, we're going to start again.
So, talking of starting again.
Yes.
Where do the Idle Race fall into this? Because this is Jeff Lynne from the Idle Race. Now, the Idle Race were happening at the same time as the move. So much so that I think the first single that the Idle Race were meant to put out had to be withdrawn because it was a Move song and the Move had already released it. It was Here We Go Round the Lemon Tree.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me see if I can remember my Move history, because I used to pride myself on this when I was a teenager. So Roy Wood is in the Mike Sheridan and the Night Riders in the 60s. That's where he starts out. Now he leaves that group in order to join the Move.
Yeah.
And the person who replaces him in the Night Riders is Jeff Lynne.
Yeah.
So already you've got this very strange.
There is that link is coming.
Yeah. Now, so then Roy gets into the Move. They go down to London, start having all these hits. Mike Sheridan leaves Mike Sheridan and the Night Riders. Jeff Lynne takes over, and they kind of change their name to the Idle Race. Jeff Lynne starts to write all these incredible songs. And then suddenly you've got the Idle Race and the Move operating in parallel, these two kind of Birmingham groups with Roy Wood in one, Jeff Lynne in the other. But the Roy Wood band is having all these hits.
Yeah.
And no matter what Jeff does, he cannot get a hit with the Idle Race. They just cannot. They get support from people like Kenny Everett, loves their records, plays their records, and he writes these very, very clever little Syd Barrett songs, Skeleton and the Roundabout and The Birthday Party, which are, again, they're kind of prized now by British psych.
But again, the originals cost a lot of money. I mean, they've been recently reissued,
but Jeff just cannot. He cannot seem to, for some reason, they just don't seem to be able to cross over into the mainstream at all.
He could have joined the Move earlier.
But he was out, wasn't he?
Yeah, he could have gone a lot earlier. But I've got my band. I think we can do it. And obviously, went second time around when Roy came knocking on his door. And Roy Wood wanted another songwriter because he was feeling the pressure of writing or being the sole writer for the Move.
Yeah.
And he saw in Jeff Lynne somebody that could take some of the pressure off him, and which showed up on the band's third album.
Yeah. I mean, I got this CD. Actually, it was a cassette. This would have been when I was about 17 or 18, and this just totally blew my tiny mind.
Yeah.
This is Jeff Lynne, 1968 to 1973, and it contains a mixture of stuff from the Idle Race, stuff from the late period Move, and very early ELO things. But this was the first time I'd heard songs such as Girl at the Window, fantastic song.
Yeah.
It references the Beatles. It's just about this girl at the window and the boy is kind of, hankering after her. And there's a verse, it goes, John and Paul and Ringo and George were playing lovely tunes from the window of her room. And you could see Jeff Lynne was such a Beatles fan. He was just like, they were his absolute idols, weren't they? And the stuff he did in the Idle Race, it was just totally infused with the spirit of Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour. So you had that song, you had The Skeleton and the Roundabout, which is about a skeleton who can't get work in the fairground. He's meant to be on the roundabout, you can't make any money, so then they put him in the ghost train. On the ghost train, it's just like totally like, where the hell would you get that idea from? Happy Birthday, which is another fantastic song by the Idle Race. Come With Me, which is a beautiful kind of McCartney-esque song. Morning Sunshine, just fantastic songs. I was like, I never realised Jeff Lynne had this kind of prehistory,
He wears his influences on his sleeve. They are one of the great lost bands, the Idle Race. They were just unlucky. I think when Roy Wood asked Jeff Lynne to join the Move for the second time, it was on the proviso. He did say, I'm going to break the band up because I want to start this new project. I want to get into heavier music. I want to infuse classical instruments into the music. And I think that appealed to Jeff Lynne on the sort of like the production side. Both were aspiring producers.
I mean, he joins the group, I would imagine, in about 1970, finally, or 69, 70. And they do this album together, which is Looking On. And this is this is sort of their heaviest album. It's the most sort of Black Sabbath-y one. You've got things on here like When Alice Comes Back to the Farm, which has got this really great slide guitar part on it. Yeah. You've got Turkish Tram Conductor Blues, and you've got Brontosaurus, which really
was a hit single for him, surprise hit single for him. got to number 7. It's interesting with that album is that you could see the shared songwriting. Wood had 5 songs on there. Jeff Lynne had 2 songs on there.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
And so by the time you get to the final album, as the picture shows, it's the core 3 now.
Yeah, so this is Message from the Country, which came out in 71. And you can see there now we've got ELO now.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, the songs that were on this CD, which I heard first on this CD, again, I just thought they were fantastic. Songs like The Minister, which is almost like a kind of paperback writer rewrite, great kind of psych Beatles type song. You've got Words of Aaron, which again is a very mysterious kind of organ-driven, bluesy, weird, progressive rock song, isn't it? Fantastic.
Yeah.
And Message from the Country, which has all these incredible Jeff Lynne and Roy Wood vocal harmonies, which is a really distinctive sound. And it's a real shame that they couldn't have seen their way to actually, making records together throughout the 70s, because I think they were a very special partnership.
Yeah, they didn't want to release that album at the time. They wanted to do the first ELO album.
Right,
but
okay.
The record label had just joined Harvest, and Harvest sort of insisted, no, we need a Move album first before you go into... So in a way, you're preparing your audience. There was a single that came out, which was When Alice Comes Back to the Farm.
Yeah, that had been on...
The original B-side that they wanted was 10:05:38 Overture. They wanted that. That was planned to be the original, to be the B-side, and then it got pulled and said, no, we'll keep that for Electric Light Orchestra. So...
Yeah, I mean, you sort of move into this really strange kind of blurred area now, where essentially you've got 3 different things happening at once. You've got the Move, who are still under contract and they're still bringing out records. So they bring out California Man in maybe 71, even 72, and they had a big hit record with it. At the same time, they're now essentially recording the first ELO album. At the same time, Roy Wood is actually recording his first solo album at the same time. So,
but California Man actually came out after this. It was released as a Frankie farewell single, California Man.
Okay.
And then became a big hit. It very popular in America's Cheap Trick do a version of it. I mean, they still had a couple of other hits like Tonight and Chinatown. They were hit singles for the band. But in the meantime, they were working as Electric Light Orchestra.
So there you have the 3 again, the same 3 guys who'd been in the final Move. But, I mean, it's the same band, isn't it? It's the same band, but just a different name. It's a really strange kind of setup, really. This album was done in, I think, kind of over a long period of time. It took them ages to do it. It was sort of an accident. When they made 10538 Overture, they'd sort of done the song, and Roy Wood had bought this kind of cheap cello, and he started scraping away on it in the studio, and Jeff said, oh, that sounds good. And he sort of ended up overdubbing about 168 of these cellos on it. And then Roy and Jeff couldn't stop playing it. They were just playing the tape constantly in the car, in the van up and down the motorway. And the other guys were going, oh, I can't stand it anymore, And Bevan thought that parts of the album were so bad that he wouldn't even play on them. It was like, I think it was the track The Battle of Marston Moor, which is this very strange, epic kind of Roy Wood, just kitchen sink and everything, playing every instrument, this weird kind of medieval cacophony, really.
On my twofer, the Battle of Marston Moor is known as the Battle of Marston Moot. They've got a misprint on it.
That's strange. Fantastic. Yeah.
I mean, you've got tracks, sort of like commercial tracks, like Mr. Radio. This is very much a Jeff Lynne song. I mean, Frank Skinner used to use that as his opening on his radio show on Absolute. Right. It is. I think the problem started with ELO when they went out and toured with like orchestra. Suddenly, they had to try and replicate this sound, And Roy Wood was forever changing instruments, which took forever. I think that started causing problems as well. So when it came to start recording Electric Light Orchestra 2,
I've got the US version.
It got to the stage where the band there's no way the band could hold the pair of them.
Yeah. I mean, there was a thing happening. I think the story is that they would be in the wings waiting to go on stage, and they had this thing where they decided that the last person to go on stage was the star of the show. So Jeff and Roy would be in the wings trying to push each other on first, because they wanted to be the one that came on last. And also what was happening, I think that all the journalists were asking Roy all the questions and giving him all the attention, and he felt that Jeff was being kind of sidelined. But the thing is, Roy really didn't do it very well, because he was already making he'd made this album, Boulders, and he basically left the band without saying anything. He just kind of went, he just disappeared. And Jeff and Bev were left kind of going, well, what? We've just been dumped. It was a strange thing.
It caused some ill feeling, yet I think Jeff and Roy did a case of make-up, because I think Jeff Lynne knows that he wouldn't be where he was without Roy Wood. I think he knew that Roy Wood played a major part in his career. Electric Light Orchestra would never have happened. And I guess Jeff Lynne might have been a jobbing producer,
And their styles were quite different, weren't they? I mean, I love this album. This is one of my favourite albums of all time. This is just a great. It's a great demonstration of just absolute distilled Roy Wood, because I think he plays all the instruments on it, and you really get to see. I mean, if you just look at the gatefold for a minute, all these different instruments that he's playing. He's on bassoons, and he's on God knows how many different instruments he plays on this. But you can definitely hear it's not the same as what Jeff Lynne wanted to do, really. You can kind of hear how it had to splinter off and go down two different paths.
Those Beatle influences that Jeff Lynne had always came to the fore when it came to ELO. I mean, John Lennon famously said if Beatles were still around, would be sounding like ELO. So
and he was a huge fan of Showdown, the song. I think he highlighted that in 1973 as one of his favourite songs of the year, and he was like, this is a really interesting sound. And I guess they were meant to be trying to pick up where the Beatles left off. That was always the kind of concept. It was to try and take this kind of Sgt. Pepper Magical Mystery Tour sound and actually try and do it live, which the Beatles, of course, had never done.
And obviously ELO had that great success. I mean, Roy, didn't rest on his laurels. Formed Wizzard. Strange album.
So Roy Wood, he forms this band called Wizzard, which is a kind of like Phil Spector, 1950s, all saxophones, rough and ready kind of sound.
And the singles, they were always on top of the pops. You got Ballpark Incidents. And then probably their best, well, not their best known track, but See My Baby Jive. On the B-side to this, there is a sort of dig at ELO a little bit, because it's Bend Over Beethoven.
That's right.
And then you got Angel Fingers, which was another number one for him. See My Baby Jive was number one. And then the song that gives him about 70% of all his royalties, I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day.
I mean, thank God that he did that, because that really set him up for life. I assume he's earned millions from that song, because every year it's wheeled out. It's interesting how Wizzard and Slade both ended up having that incredible little twist of luck, where it's sort of luck, but they get associated just with this one song, essentially.
Same year as well, 73.
Strange, isn't it?
And same year, Elton John had Step Into Christmas as well.
They don't make them like that anymore.
No. I mean, Wizzard, he also, going back to his rock and rolls, and the next album, which is Eddie and the Falcons, this is very much a rock and roll album. You can see from the gatefold here that the band are dressed as Teddy Boys. This is them going back. So Roy Wood was sort of going back into the music they played. It's
interesting and a bit depressing, really, to kind of bring the story up to date as far as Roy is concerned, because even though he had this little flush of success with Wizzard, his career basically sputtered out. And I don't know what you think, but I mean, I played this again this morning, Wizzard Brew, and I listened to Mustard not so long ago. I got an MP3 of that, and those albums, they are quite difficult in a way. I mean, for a start, he seems to have gone down this kind of pastiche route. So he had this thing in the 60s where he was making all these really original pop singles, and he seemed to have his own voice, and he seemed to really have his own identity. As you get into the 70s and he gets into the Wizzard thing, he seems to start, because he was a really great musical imitator. So he could do Elvis Presley, he could do Jerry Lee, and he could really do it convincingly. He could do these amazing vocal impersonations. But on Mustard and on Brew, it's almost like he's vanished up his own posterior. He's just totally retro, pastiche kind of thing, you know.
On the single he did, solo single he did, Forever, it's got on the label, with special thanks to Brian Wilson and Neil Sedaka for their influence.
Okay.
And then the B-side is Music to Commit Suicide by. It's almost like it's sort of starting to disappear a little bit.
Roy, to my knowledge, has never kind of gone on record and acknowledged exactly what happened. I mean, he must know himself that it was a fairly ignominious fall, you know, in a way, you know, to go from being such an accepted part of the pop landscape to essentially being out in the wilderness. And what must have made it difficult for him was that Jeff Lynne, meanwhile, he kind of went off and he took ELO to America, and by sort of 76, 77, you're talking like...
Yeah. I think Royce decided to concentrate more on production. He produced some Renaissance albums. That's partly he was in a relationship with Annie Haslam at the time. So I think he sort of went on production. Wizzard, it sort of ran out of steam when the glam rock had sort of ebbed out. They stopped appearing on Top of the Pops. I think Rick Price, who was bass player in Wizzard, he ended up going into management and was the road manager for Peters and Lee, and ended up marrying Diane Peters out the...
I love that. So many little stories and little kind of... There's something about this kind of Birmingham rock story. It's just endlessly fascinating, endlessly just the trivia that you can mine.
There's a single, if you can find it, where Roy Wood is doing sort of like Stars on 45 with Chaz Hodges, John Copeland and Phil Lynott, called The Rockers.
I've seen that.
Yeah. You know, it's you know, I mean, that probably might have been his last chart action, actually, if you don't take away the endless reissues of I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day. The Move did get back together for a gig in 1981 at the Locarno. It was a charity gig.
I think David was involved with that, wasn't he, as well?
Yeah, it was all the members that did the one-off gig. Obviously, Carl Wayne, after his sojourn with Cabaret, he ended up singing with the Hollies. And apparently he was talking to other members of the Move before he died about getting involved with Bev Bevan's Move. Before he passed away in 2004. Ace Keffins is still around, but he's had a troubled life with alcoholism. There've been various suicide attempts, and Trevor Burton's been very ill. Bev Bevan still does he teams up with rock and comedy with Jasper Carrot. He plays with that, and then we got Roy doing his own thing. And I think if we're going to end, if you can see this album, this is called The Roy Wood Story. It came out, I believe, 74, 75. This is all stuff that comes from his harvest, from his move up to his years on Harvest. This is a good album to get familiarised yourself with Roy Wood, the genius of Roy Wood.
Well, there we go. We did it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know how long we've been going for.
I must admit, at the start of this video, I thought this is like a tangled thicket. Like, how on earth are we ever going to get through this? But we did manage to navigate it somehow. If you haven't checked out Roy Wood, Jeff Lynne, the Idle Race, The Move, I'm sure you've checked out ELO because they're absolutely huge, aren't they? But I do find it's an interesting story because you've got this really big kind of name, and then you've got this kind of history which goes back gradually into this kind of dark West Midlands obscurity. I just love it. That's it for now.
See you, everyone.
Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Absolutely pouring down with